This right here is probably going to be the last audio interface you're ever going to need. So this right here is the RME UCXII, which is a 20 input, 20 output, half rack size, ultra portable audio interface that works with Mac, PC. It also is class compliant, so it will work with your iPad as an audio interface. Even your MPC is an audio interface. It's compatible with the ARC USB controller, which unlocks a whole new world of possibilities. And it also has TotalMix, which in my opinion is the most flexible and advanced digital audio routing mixing console software available, which you can also control completely with an iPad. And on top of all that, this right here is a 20 input, 20 output, fully standalone multi-track recorder. Yeah, this thing is standalone too. So in my ongoing quest to update my studio with the most versatile but best bang for the buck equipment, I came across the RME UCXII. Now, full disclosure, because this is going to be a very positive video, I'm not getting paid to say any of this. All these opinions are my own. I'm just really impressed with the value that this unit delivers. Now, let's talk about price right off the bat. The unit itself is about $1,600, and then the ARC USB controller, which I feel is a must, comes in at around $180. So you're looking at right around $1,800. But if you look at that as an investment in your studio, you're gonna probably have this interface for as long as you have your studio. One, it can grow with you, but two, RME writes their own drivers and they are known for supporting all of their equipment. They support equipment from 20, 30 years ago. So you know if you have one of their pieces of gear, the drivers compatibility, software compatibility is all going to be supported for as long as you have this unit. Now, if you're interested in picking it up, I do have an affiliate link to Zounds down below. They have amazing financing and a lot of the time don't even run a credit check. And a little tiny portion of that goes back to the channel to help support the channel. So if you're interested in picking up this or any other piece of gear, I would really appreciate it if you click the link down below to help keep this channel going. Now, there's a lot of videos out there about the UCXII that covers all the tech specs. So we're gonna focus this video more on practical application. When we talk about the ins and the outs of the unit, I'm gonna show you what I have connected and why I have it connected that way. And then when we talk about TotalMix, I'm gonna actually show you a couple of the routing scenarios that I have frequently in my studio, how I set up the snapshots to efficiently and quickly switch between all of them, and how that could maybe help you increase your workflow inside of your studio. So with that being said, let's just jump into all the reasons why this RME UCXII is probably gonna be the last audio interface you're ever gonna need. So let's take a look at the connections on the front of the unit. On the left, we have two microphone combo jacks. So you can either do a 1/4 inch in or an XLR. I like to have these all the time connected to two microphones that I just call floater mics. These are just in the middle of the studio. They can be brought over to the couch. They can be over to the chair. So when we're doing writing sessions, if someone has an idea for a top line or a melody that they want to drop in really quickly, they just grab one of those mics. They're always armed to record. They're always set up. It's really good to have those in the studio. Then on input 3 and 4, what we have is one guitar and one bass directly connected because these are high Z inputs right here. Then the only other thing we need is the headphones connected. So when it's time to record those vocals, they can actually just hear the vocal coming directly out of the headphone with the custom mix that we set up in TotalMix for them. So now we're looking at the back of the unit. And the very first thing we're gonna set up on the back is going to be our main monitors coming out of 1 and 2 right here. Now we're also going to then route out another signal that's going to be connected to the Warm Audio 2 MPX coming out of outputs 5 and 6. Now we're leaving 3 and 4 open because in the future we plan on getting an extra set of monitors, and those are going to go directly into outputs 3 and 4. But now we need to bring in a couple of signals. So the first one we're going to bring in is to line number 7, which is going to be our preamp, the SSL 6 500 series preamp, which is my go-to preamp for tracking in final vocals. But then we also want to bring the warm audio 2 MPX back in. So that's going to come back in on lines 5 and 6 in order to match the output. So going out to the warm audio 2 MPX, coming back into the warm audio 2 MPX. Now on the left side of the unit for digital outputs, the only one we're going to use is the ADAT out going to our 8-channel preamp where all the synthesizers are connected. That is 4 stereo pairs of inputs. And it also leaves 8 channels of output, which we haven't connected yet, but in the future, as we update to more external analog gear, those ADAT 8 outputs will come in very handy. Now in the first USB port, we are going to connect the Arc USB remote. This is also where you put a USB stick if you were using this in the full standalone multi-track recording mode. But for now, we're just going to use it as the USB Arc controller. And then we just need to connect it to the computer right here. And finally, we just need to connect the power. And as you can see here, it does have locking teeth on the plug. So when you insert it into the back, you simply need to line it up and give it a twist, and then it locks into place, ensuring that it won't come out even if the cable is pulled on a little bit. Now that everything's connected, let's talk about sound quality and drivers. First off with sound quality, the sound quality in the UCXII is second to none. It is on par with anything in the top tier level of converters and interfaces, and I would say it is one of the best interfaces in its price range as far as sound quality goes. Now, the one thing that really jumped out at me on first use was the headphone amplifier. If you saw one of my previous videos talking about another audio interface, one of my biggest complaints on that was the headphone amplifier. I'm using the NDH20s here, which are fairly power hungry and require a lot to push them. On the other interface, I had to go almost all the way up to 0 in order to get ample volume out of these. But the UCXII only had to go up maybe to about 35–40% of the total volume in order to push these to a level where anything more than that would just be uncomfortable as far as volume. That being said, I feel that I can trust these headphones a lot more now that they're being supplied with ample power from, actually over amounts of power from such a strong headphone amplifier. So now let's talk about drivers. And as we said at the beginning of the video, RME is known for their drivers. They are supporting pieces of gear that are over 15 years old, meaning that that gear will still work on modern computer systems. And I'll be honest, I always thought that drivers just meant stability of the audio interface, that it wouldn't disconnect from the computer, that would work with the computer, and that it would always be connected to my DAW, which is a large part of what drivers do. But I've also found, and maybe this is psychosomatic, but I've also found that I can push a lot lower buffer sizes out of my DAW without getting crackles and pops. It seems that RME has developed drivers that allow me to run at lower buffer rates on my computer, staying down at 32 or 64 samples, which means I have almost imperceivable latency if I want to monitor directly through my DAW, which a lot of times you don't need to because you have TotalMix, which has direct monitoring. But let's say I want to run auto-tune on a channel so an artist can hear some auto pitch correction. I have almost imperceivable latency and can run these drivers extremely low at 32 or 64 buffer on my DAW, and it is very stable. We are inside of TotalMix, and at first it may look a little overwhelming, but once you wrap your head around it, it's actually extremely intuitive. So at the very top is going to be our hardware inputs. Earlier in the video, while we set up all the physical inputs into the UCXII, that is where these are going to be, and we will go through and label all these in a moment. Then below that is going to be what's called the software playback. Now this is anything coming out of your DAW or your computer in a digital sense, such as if you were in Ableton, Cubase, or Logic and you had, let's say, outputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's where you would see the levels here. Then at the bottom, we have our actual hardware outputs. Now, one concept to understand with the hardware outputs on an RME and TotalMix interface is that they have what's called a submix. So anytime you click on one of these hardware outputs, you're going to see the levels of both the hardware inputs and the software playback change, because you can have a different submix for each one of these actual hardware outputs. But we're going to come back to that. the first thing we want to do is actually go through and get all of our hardware inputs labeled correctly so we just have a better understanding of all the signal that's coming into the computer. Now, by default, all of these inputs are going to be in stereo pairs, so we're going to have to go through and start unlinking them. As we saw earlier in the video, input 1 and 2 were those floater mics that we had coming in, so let's click here and unlink these. Remember to put the pan back to the center, and let's name this, let's say float mic 1, and let's name this float 2. Then on 3 and 4, this is where we had our guitar, GTR, and also we had our bass guitar. And let's remember to set the pan back to the center. Also, if we come into these, we're going to click on the wrench, change it to an instrument input, and also have auto gain, which is going to monitor the input that's coming in and automatically adjust our gain, which is a huge time saver. So let's go set auto gain and change this to instrument. Now on 5 and 6, we actually had that coming in a stereo pair, and that was from the Warm Audio 2 MPX. So let's label that. 7 and 8, we wanted to decouple that. Set it back to the center. And 7 coming in was our SSL 6 channel strip coming in. 8 we're just going to leave alone. We are not using SPDIF or AES, but on all these ADATs we have our different synths. So we're just going to say synth 1, synth 2, synth 3, and synth 4. Let's close these. Now what we've done is we've gone through and labeled everything accordingly, so when we take a glance, we know exactly what levels are coming in from what different sources. Down to the lower section, we already have our mains already set up to go out through the 1 and 2 as they were connected, and in the future we'll probably route our 3 and 4 and assign those as a second pair of monitors. But we did have 5 and 6 going out to the Warm Audio 2 MPX. So let's get that labeled. And then everything else is pretty much open because we don't have anything connected to those ADAT outputs yet. So now we have both our hardware inputs and outputs labeled. I want to save this as a default, meaning that I have a safe place where I know what all the levels are doing. And for that, I want to go over here and select main. I want to make sure that I have nothing coming in, so I can just reset every sort of input signal down to 0. And I only want to hear my output from my DAW as the main output. So I only want to hear output 1 and 2 coming from the DAW. So I'm going to set all these down to 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and store this as a snapshot. And a snapshot is essentially the ability to instantly recall any of the settings and any of the routing that we set up based on the situation. So I'm going to come over here, hit store, and then hit mix number 1. Meaning that default scenario set up. Let's go ahead and look at the most commonly used scenario in my studio, which is tracking some vocals. Now we track in the control room, so the first thing we're going to want to do is when we go into our tracking mode for vocals, I want to mute the main outputs. So on main right here, I'm going to go ahead and mute those. So now that we've muted the main monitors, we're going to go over to the headphones and create the custom mix that the vocalist is going to hear out of those headphones. First thing I know they want to hear is they're going to want to hear the backing track of the DAW, and that's coming out of the software playback. So let's go ahead and turn that up just a little bit. And since we're going to be tracking through the SSL6, they're also going to want to hear their vocal. Now, right here, we could save this. They would be hearing their dry vocal and the playback of the reference track. But most vocalists are going to want a little bit of reverb. And that's where we're going to come over here into the effects section, and we're going to turn on the reverb. And we have to make sure that we're sending the signal to the reverb. So we're going to send their vocal mic to the reverb. One cool thing in TotalMix is you adjust the fader. It's going to adjust the send accordingly, so you always have a balanced amount of reverb. But I also want them to be able to hear the reverb through the headphones. So we're going to come down here into the headphones and turn up the reverb so they are getting the playback from the effect right here. So in this scenario, what the vocalist is hearing in their custom headphone mix is the playback of the track and also the SSL6 with a little bit of reverb all coming out through their headphones. Now I want to save this so I can quickly recall these settings. Store. Let's put that into mix number 2. Now we can keep going forward and set up more snapshots for more scenarios inside of the studio. So let's say we wanted a snapshot for when we just wanted to record and have a jam with all 4 of these synthesizers coming in through the ADATs. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over to the mains, and I'm going to uncheck the mute so I can hear the sound coming through the mains. And I'm going to come over here to each one of these synthesizers and turn them up. Right here. Once those are up, we can go ahead again and store this as another snapshot. Now let's go ahead and review our different snapshots that we really quickly just set up. Snapshot number 1 is just our default, where all the inputs are brought down to 0 and the only thing we're hearing is audio out of the computer. Then in snapshot number 2, for when a vocalist wants to record, we hit number 2. What happens is our mains get muted, but over here on the headphones, we have the playback coming out of the DAW for the reference of the playback. And then we also have their vocal coming in with some reverb on the vocal and the reverb coming out through the headphones here. Now we want to then have a little jam session with our 4 synthesizers over here so we can see what's happening. If we click on main, we're going to go ahead and hit number 3. We're going to unmute the main and have all 4 of these synthesizers come up. And for each snapshot, each one of these outputs can have a different submix and different routing. So as you can see, it was fairly easy and quick to get a couple of scenarios set up as snapshots, save them, and instantly recall them inside TotalMix. But on the other side of that, if you had a very complex system with a lot of outboard gear, you can do some very complex routing and then save that as a snapshot. So even though TotalMix may look a little bit overwhelming at first, once you wrap your head around it, it's actually really quick, easy, and intuitive, and you can control nearly everything from the Arc USB remote. So when it's connected by default, the main jog here controls your volume of your main speakers. You can quickly adjust your headphone levels just by hitting the headphone button right there. And all of those snapshots that we set up earlier can be toggled with the snap 1 through 8 buttons up top. So our default of just setting everything back to 0, our snap 2 when a vocalist comes in and wants to record some vocals, and then we want to do our synth jam here to bring up all the levels on our synthesizers, and then when we're done with everything, just for safety, let's set everything back to our default. And it doesn't stop there. All of these buttons on the Arc USB are completely customizable. So, such as talkback here, I have no use for talkback in my studio, but I'd like to reassign that to actually mute my main monitors as a quick way just to turn off all the volume inside of the studio. So what we're going to do here on the software is we're going to come up in the options, go into Arc and key command settings, and then we're going to want to come over and select the second button, the Arc USB. Come on down to where it says talkback, and we're going to just want to go up and change this to main outs. Now, by hitting the talkback button, we can instantly see that we are muting our main outputs. Now, there's another really cool thing you can customize inside of the Arc USB, which is the ability to toggle in between your TotalMix window and your DAW window. So this button up here, external input, is another one that I don't use. So I'm going to then further customize it. Come right back to where we were before, and then come down to external input and go all the way up to the top, which is toggle TotalMix window, hit OK. And now if I'm in my DAW, which in this case is Bitwig, and I want to quickly jump right back to my TotalMix window, I can just hit this button. It's going to flip me right back to the TotalMix window. I can make some adjustments and then click it again and instantly flip back to my DAW. Now that's one really cool way to have a quick workflow. But on top of that, you can even use an iPad to control TotalMix remotely. As long as your iPad and your computer are set up to the same network, you can have complete control over every single parameter inside of TotalMix with a touchscreen, meaning that you'll never have to leave your DAW window. You can create your custom submixes for the vocalist or any other musician inside of the studio session without ever leaving your DAW. Now, even when a computer is not connected to the UCXII, it can run full class compliant, connected to an iPad or any device like an MPC, but also run as a full standalone multi-track recorder. So if we click right here on setup in the bottom, we can see that we're right now inside of our class compliant mode. And we have the ability to switch from using the TotalMix app, let's say if we're connected to an iPad, to running 6 channels in with headphones, 8 channels in and out, or all 20 of the channels in and out at the same time. Now, to use Durarack, we will need to connect a USB stick to the back. This will allow us to record all incoming 20 channels to the connected USB stick. Now, while we're using this in standalone, we do have the ability to do full playback of all of our recordings. Simply by hitting the record and play button right here is where we would activate the ability to record our sessions or play it back. But in the future, we will have a complete video on how to set up and use Durarack. Now, to wrap up this video, let's just recap what we just talked about. 1, it's a 20 in, 20 out audio interface and a half rack ultra portable size. 2, once you get all those connections and expand as your studio grows, you can control the routing of all that with TotalMix, which in my opinion is the most versatile and flexible software you can use to control any sort of audio interface. 3, you can set up different scenarios and recall them all with the snapshots on top of the Arc controller or key commands on your computer if you'd like. So any scenario, whether it's a vocalist coming in the studio or you want to record all your software instruments or set it up for outboard mixing processing, you can recall that quickly with a snapshot. On top of that, you have a full class compliant device, meaning you can travel with just an iPad and still have 20 ins and 20 outs on an iPad. But if you don't have an iPad or a computer, this is still a fully standalone 20 in, 20 out unit. So I hope this video helped you see the amount of versatility, value, and flexibility you can get out of something in a half rack ultra portable size. On top of that, the peace of mind that I know now that this unit is going to be supported with compatibility and software updates for as long as I have the unit in my studio. And on that note, let me know in the comments down below what kind of audio interface you have in your studio and if you plan on updating anytime soon. Now, if you do, please show a little support for the channel and click the Zounce affiliate link down below because a little bit of that goes back and helps us keep on growing and going. My name is Stu. This is Create, Educate, and Inspire. As always, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And I hope you keep making music and you make something cool. Peace.